Instead of having some closing remarks, we're asking some of the GRN leadership back up here for, I briefly called it a round table, but really what it is it's a chance for them to ask you questions, you as parents. You know, we've had a lot of social time together. You've heard a lot of things from them. You've heard a lot of social support things as well. But they wanted the opportunity perhaps to ask you questions and be available for any additional questions you may have, really in terms of what are your priorities, what do you, and we as a foundation need to hear this as well. Literally, what do you want done? What is it that we're not doing? What's missing? What's next? Those sort of things, and because we need that feedback so that we can continue making great progress, which I think is really what we're doing. So, is Jen? There's Jen. Is Rebecca out? And Dirk? Okay, excellent. Did you want to come up and at least have a seat? And Andrew might be. Oh, there's Becca. Not at all. So. We're just running a few minutes behind. So anyway, I'd like them to kind of maybe open up with some questions, and who would like to volunteer some answers, I'll be the one in the jogging shoes and bring the microphone back and forth for you. So, so welcome back, Jen and Dirk and Rebecca.
We have to admit we don't have a real agenda here, just perhaps start with a brief feedback that we very much like the interaction with you, and that we learned as every year a lot, and it's also a progress for us every time, and we always discover new angles of how you deal with the situation, what the positive, not so positive things are, what the challenges are, and I think the challenges, that's probably what we should be talking about. And I guess the most obvious feedback question from our side is regarding the presentations, if that was helpful, if it was understandable. I already heard a little bit through the grapevines that we should pay more attention to the medical aspects. This was indeed underrepresented this year, perhaps also because we didn't have so many clinicians here, right? So that would be something we would be looking into and have more representation next time. Is that something you would agree on? Additional comments?
One of the questions I was going to ask is a little bit related to that. Is it does seem like at this point the research is very heavily on the, I guess what I would call the back end, right? Not as much on the clinical front end. What do you think we need to do, or how do we recruit more of a clinician side so that we have that a little bit more balanced and have folks that understand? And I mean, I think we've all educated our physicians more on PURA than the other way around. So how do we build up that clinician side of the network? And yes, to answer your question, to hear more on that side would be great in the future. Mm-hmm.
I think we were discussing this with the board because we know that this is an issue, and there are two things. One is, of course, people who you see to take care of your kids and you know, for treatment and so on. And the other thing is, of course, the research, clinical research, and that is going on. Unfortunately, most of the people aren't there. Rebecca is doing a little bit on that, besides building up the registry, which actually took up most of her time, I think. But those people aren't here. But the EEG study, for instance, that is one thing that has been started because we realized we have to do more about that. And we're bugging them and saying, like, come up with a consistent plan. And I know that Mel was hunting them down quite a bit. So you got to do more on that. You know, it can't be just the diagnosis. And I think that perhaps was a bit too reassuring in the beginning. We find more people and we just keep doing this. But at some point, you know, that is not research anymore because you just find more cases, and of course you can make meta-analysis, where do the mutations sit and so on. And we discussed this outside this noon. But yeah, one has to be more inventive and do more things. But we know this, we discuss it with the board. I think a really related aspect is a more organized networks network of clinicians who talk to each other, exchange. We also have it on the agenda, right?
Yep.
I mean, perhaps you can add it.
Absolutely. And I think through those discussions this weekend and these conversations just exactly like this, as well as I think it was the April board meeting, we started talking about, how do we engage more clinicians? What does that look like? And it came because earlier in the year, a clinician reached out to us and said, hey, we'd like to, is there a way to get engaged, with this? And we really struggled with the question, what does that look like? What does that mean? And we're still working on that, but perhaps the concept from the foundation side is to help facilitate a clinical network or a mentoring scheme for clinicians where regionally or by specialty, there's a clinician in the background who would volunteer to take questions from others, okay? So it's not necessarily public information. It's not on the website where you as a parent could go look up someone else's neurologist, okay? But your neurologist could contact, sort of a blind email, if you will, maybe in theory, and that goes to this neurologist who says, yes, I want to take questions on PURA, and here's where I am. Something like that, so that it's a peer-to-peer network, and then we as a foundation can facilitate a structure for them to operate in and interaction with us as a foundation, therefore with you as parents, and with the GRN who are really doing research, because there is a separation between research doctors, clinicians, and then there's this hybrid clinical researchers, and there are really sort of three different places to step. So it's something we've identified relatively recently, and I look at the broad picture and I go, why didn't we start talking about this before? Right? But I think it's because we were talking about so many other things. So that is one of our priorities now. I can say that with all confidence that this is what we're going to be working on for the rest of the year and until there's something up and running. And I think that there's enthusiasm from different clinicians to get into that. And we're working on ways to help generate that enthusiasm. So Jen and I were just talking about a couple of different ideas over lunch today as well. So it's hot button issue, hot in the front burner.
Can I just add one more thing about that? So that's an issue with loads of these rare diseases, and which is a real shame. And it's definitely been something that they've focused on in the last couple of years. And Andrew spoke about this on Friday, about also recognising that PURA syndrome obviously is a rare disease, and trying to get under the rare disease umbrellas and getting recognised, so that even if your clinician isn't always a PURA dedicated person, they're also a rare disease dedicated person, and therefore they may have more of an interest in PURA than someone who doesn't know anything about rare disease. So.
And I might have done a little bit of injustice to the clinicians in the back of the whole thing, because they're doing a lot of things to get structures established, and it doesn't seem to be the active research you see here, but it's necessary to get on panels, to get enlisted and involved in umbrella organizations and those things, and it's also a considerable amount of work that is necessary, and that's stuff that's going on and takes time, and so they're doing also those things. Will pay off in the long term.
I saw a comment over here.
So we're from Canada, and I just find, again, as everybody's mentioned, not a lot of primary care engagement, people not understanding it. We do have a very reputable hospital, a hospital for sick kids in Toronto. How do you spark the interest of some of the researchers there to follow, your child who has PURA? Like, how do you sort of advocate for your child?
I think that we need to differentiate between research and clinicians, because research, especially in rare disease, there's not always going to be one researcher for that one child with rare disease in your country, but there should definitely be a clinician, or hopefully you'd hope there'd be a clinician that could support you to then get into those research or have those research opportunities. And that's going back to the whole trying to get that network up and running, really. So we are going to really focus on that. But also we need to know where you all are, so that we can, the hot spots, so we can try and find clinicians in those areas.
Just one comment on this particular topic. On your talk, I made a note of your slide that you had the parents, the clinicians, and the researchers in boxes, and the one box that wasn't highlighted was the clinicians. But if you think about just this group here, how many clinicians are involved with each of these children? My son has probably at least 50 clinicians involved in his care. And we come from Chicago. There are 6 of the PURA kids diagnosed in Chicago, and I don't think there's any overlap of doctors. And we've got the University of Chicago, Northwestern, all of those are represented. And I know for a fact that his epileptologist would be more than happy to participate in this group and to contribute, especially to the EEG study. He's very interested in that study. Mayo Clinic, he has a whole team of doctors at Mayo Clinic in Rochester that would also be more than happy to participate in this group. So I hope that somehow we will tap into that vast resource. And the one thing I was thinking this morning, and maybe a way that we can do that, like I say, we all have all these clinicians to have a form that they can fill out somehow that gives the information that they have available to them to give to this organization. I don't know how that's going to happen, but that's one question. And then I would like to know about the biobank and where we stand on that and how we can submit samples now and going forward, or save the samples so that, because these kids are progressing and we need that data now, so what we can do about that.
So these were a lot of questions and comments, right? I'm not sure if I can keep them all, but I think the first answer to a form that would be available to doctors to fill it out, the longitudinal study, right? The registry, that's exactly that, right?
Yeah, so the registry will take information from your clinician, but if you have identified a clinician who might want to be part of this network or the named clinician in the area, obviously it would be, if they've consented to it, I think there's got to be a way of feeding that back to the foundation, because the foundation, I think, are going to try and organise that clinical network of clinicians. I hope I haven't just given you a job there, but
Nope, send us their name, and we'll figure out what to do and how to do it. I don't have an answer of how, but we'll figure it out.
I mean, one thing we discussed and we agreed on was that we would have to have a contact points on the website or a sub-page for clinicians. So they see the web page and they directly can click on it and have a very condensed set of information with contact points, and that will be distributed then from the people who are really dedicated to PURA Foundation. And then if they want to get involved better, then wonderful. But I intentionally left out these from the boxes because right now that's the status quo, right? And I think it's something one can discuss. I think most of you doctors don't have much time, as I heard. Right? So the 15 minutes in the UK, it's hard to motivate somebody to come here. But if you have somebody wonderful, and perhaps some of them could interact, yeah, it would be great. And I'm sure Foundation would be happy to support that in any means, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That's last year we came out with a clear understanding in the 2 years ago, priorities about addressing seizures and epilepsy, and we've taken action on that. This one, what we're hearing today, is a clinical network, clinical connections, of a peer-to-peer, something for your doctors to understand and have support for them that's on their level as well. So we will be taking action. Absolutely.
And from a clinician's point of view, I think it's really nice that you're thinking about us all and trying to get other people to support us. So I think that's really nice thing to you.
Yeah, and I think it is. I think it is great that for the large part, your clinicians are very passionate people about these cases and about our cases, and they do have that enthusiasm to reach out as well. So we really want to tap into that and get them together to do that. So because they're going to have a whole host of observations and knowledge and understanding that we as parents, may kind of inherently do, but don't know how to communicate. And you as researchers, are looking at one thing, and this is, something else. So I've got a lot of enthusiasm for it. I think this is really going to be great, and we'll do that. We will work on that. So, did I see another question over here?
Dominic, I don't think we answered about the biobank.
Oh, yes.
Which
Sorry.
I'll leave you to.
Leave it to me, that's great. Indeed, we had, the plan was that the registry should be up and running, or at least, settled. And then as a next big thing, the biobank. That was the plan way back. And we have identified spots where we could do that. Munich is one of them, with a very professionally organized and running non-commercial biobank, where all the rights and the ownership remains with the foundation. That's something we found very important. And yes, so the registry is almost there, and that means that's the next thing to pick up. And part of the discussion during this weekend was if that is really priority. Like when we met with the board on Friday evening, I think, that was one of the questions. Is it really important? Is the biobank important? Why is it important? And I think the consistent statement from our side was it is really important and will help further down the road. It's one of the things with lots of leverage on the long term, and so that's why we really want to get it going. But it takes time. It requires legal issues to be taken care of, a contract to be made, and I think the foundation right now has to think of who and how this is being done on their side. And I think, since there's a little bit of restructuring going on, we have to give them a little bit of time to do it in the right way, because it has to work also, not only on short term, but it should be done in a proper way. And this will happen, I'm sure.
Well, yeah. To follow on to that, we do have sites that can receive samples now.
Mm-hmm.
They're not sort of cataloged, but they have the ability to be cataloged. And so, why don't you see me after this, and we'll figure out what you have and where we can get that to, if you will, because there's a bunch of different control issues. There's ethical requirements. There's transportation requirements. There's how are these things preserved, that sort of stuff, and then where do we get them? In the background, there's a process going on at Jen's lab that are getting ethical approval. I don't believe it's in place quite yet, but it's near. It's very close, so that she can receive samples. Now, I believe that you can't send them under that, or you can. You can send them out too. So
you should be able to receive existing samples and be able to share them with the other sites.
Yep.
Again, it would be the foundation needs a process in place for approval of what to do with those samples. And
Exactly.
That's really where we research. The research network needs to work with a committee from the foundation at what that looks like. So
Yep.
there's a transparent process.
So.
It always depends on what the samples could be used for. I mean, I think for the US to collect them at Jen's place and then ship them over to us, for instance, that's a good approach for most of the samples. But when we talk about skin biopsies, they're freshly taken and then directly shipped. And it would be, I think, would be really bad for the samples if they would have a stopover somewhere else. You would lose a couple of generations of cell divisions, and that is not good. So we would rather like them to receive them directly. So it depends on the case, and the best thing is simply to approach us or Dom or somebody else from the foundation, and then we sort out what for this particular sample the best approach would be. Yep. That's the current procedure.
And with that, I'm going to emphasize for you to be proactive. If you believe you have samples that could be useful, contact the place that has them now. Contact that doctor, that lab. Make yourself known that, hey, we are working on a way to use this and transport it. Please take good care of it, know where it is, don't get rid of it. Okay, so be proactive so that they don't think it's just sitting there collecting dust, so that they know somebody cares about that. And I think that's a level of advocacy, right? And that goes a long, long ways for being able to capture those things when we're ready to capture those, which I think will be soon.
We're really grateful that you're so willing to consider this, to be honest. Yeah, this is great. Yeah.
All right.
So I know the registry's been kind of a big thing and hopefully wrapping that up. And then there was the seizure study. I'm guessing it's getting wrapped up. But what's like the next kind of big priority?
Yeah, so I think the main question we wanted to hear back from the group here is how are you going to set priorities for what you want to tell us is important? So we have lots of research questions about mechanism that I think hopefully you appreciate from our discussion, how we need to understand what's happening so that we can understand how to modulate the pathway that's controlling PURA, right? But there are other issues, quality of life issues, issues that might be a clinical priority. And we need to hear what those priorities are because we can't work on all of them and we need to have a plan on which ones to prioritize. And some of that's about the practicalities. Some may be very easy questions to answer. Some may be very difficult. Some are very important. Some are less important. So what do? Do you pick the one that's less important but easy to answer? Or do we push for the one that is very difficult but is the most important? And what's the timeline and what are the resources required to get there? And that's going to require some strategic planning.
And really, we do need to hear from you. What are your priorities? What is that one thing you haven't heard that's going to help you the most, or that keeps you up at night? What is that one or two things? You know. So.
Well, there was one comment by one of the mothers who said, "I found it interesting that you only work on the negative sides of the whole thing," which is of course true. We want to find out what is going wrong and so on. We work, of course, on the cellular level, on the organismal level, but I think it was meant to be on a different level. These kids are very social, very emotional, and I mean, that's research we don't do. That's more probably psychology, something like that, but there was a kind of a suggestion that it would be nice and interesting to see what the positive effects are. I really like that. Yeah.
It's true though, I say like there's something about this.
Other questions? All right.
That was Jurek Adamski's cell phone.
You know that sound well, yeah?
So I may be getting ahead, but endocrine issues seem to be a hot topic for me personally. I know all of us, or a lot of us, have been through some or all, and it may be a little further ahead than what you're working on in research. I mean, it may be a point that you're working toward, but I don't know how everybody else feels, but that for me is a hot topic.
So that's a hot topic for me as well. So two things. That was something that was fed back to us when we were developing the study, and there's a whole questionnaire on endocrine, mainly on bone health and puberty, because they were the two things that we were told about. The other thing that hopefully we're doing is looking, well, with Jen's mice, we had a long discussion today about which bits are the tissues that we really want to keep and study, and bone has been one of those things, focus, and hopefully in time, obviously we can't do everything at once, but hopefully we'll start storing gonads as well, which is the ovary and testicular tissue, so it's on our radar, definitely. but we only know those because of feedback that we got. So we need to keep on hearing that feedback.
That's good, thank you. I think we've got time for probably two more. Let's say two more. Did I see a hand over here earlier? All right, one more then, one more.
I am particularly fascinated with all of your research, as I know that you guys probably are too, and you've expressed this already, but I am particularly interested in hopefully maybe discovering if there are ways that we can slightly increase the amount of that pure alpha protein, because it sounds like if there's a mechanism for that, whether it's supplemental or dietary or a drug, that it could have huge impact for our kids. It may not necessarily 100%, from what I understand, reverse the disease itself, and there could still be some issues, but it seems as though it would be a potential huge breakthrough. So that for me is, as I've heard you talk,
That's something we of course discuss as well. And first we have to show that this correlation really exists, right? When you look at mutations that are reoccurring and the broad spectrum that we find in the different patients, there's something that modulates it, right? The mutation is identical, but the patients have very different symptoms sometimes. And one of the possibilities could be that there is a regulatory mechanism that works better in the ones that are more able to do things than the ones that have more severe symptoms. And can't do that in humans, of course, but for instance in cell culture, when we understand what the issues are in the development of neurons, we could add back a little bit or so, and we could see if that really happens in the background of one mutant copy, one broken copy. I mean, these are the things where we're discussing if that would be the approach. We're not there yet. We haven't done any experiments, but I guess you agree, right?
Absolutely. I mean, ideally, we would be able to use the different animal models and see what actually happens. As Dirk mentioned, too much PURA, too much of the protein per alpha might be just as bad as not enough, and we need to really understand how it's regulated.
That's great. Last call, last chance. All right, here we are.
So there's the PURA mice. Do they seem the same, or are they like our kids, which just, the symptoms vary greatly?
Yeah, so the mice have exactly the same genetics, and they have the same genetic background. So they're litter mates, and they're inbred. So one of the ways that we study mice is by looking at the inbred strain to try to avoid those variables. But as I told you, there are so many different mice. If we put them on a different strain or different background, we might see different symptoms. But we try to control flow all of that in the lab. So we do replicates of animals, and then we compare how they are between each other, and they're fairly similar but not identical. So some of the analysis that Andrew's doing and Ulrich is doing with our first experiments in the animals will tell us what kind of variability we see. And we don't know what those effects are, but mice like us could be affected by the diet, the time of the year, the water source, the environment, all of these other things. Even though they're in a very controlled environment, the microbiome, which everybody likes to talk about today, may be different. So there is likely a lot of variability, but there's still some of the same features that we see all the time in these animals. So it's a pretty consistent model.
All right, there were two more.
Another area of research that maybe not be a high priority, but just in general nutrition and as related to tone or seizures or other things, micronutrients that might have an impact, wouldn't necessarily always be specific to PURA, but there are some nutritional things that have been implicated to be helpful or whatnot, or even just in general a study of high protein or different things that our kids need more of just to help with their nutritional status. I think that would be kind of an interesting area of study.
Yeah, so one of the goals of doing the RNA screening and the metabolomics is to try to identify things that are changed between the PURA mice and wild-type mice. And if there are some easy targets and we think there could be an intervention, could we do a study in the mice or in the zebrafish or the frog? But then we also, so that's kind of like a long-term plan. But we were talking about building out the clinical research network, and there are opportunities here to then try some things and also maybe add a questionnaire to the registry once there are some clinical researchers interested to start to query patients and see what's going on in the community. And sometimes that's where these ideas come from. And then everybody's talking to each other, and how do you try to formalize that a little bit more? So that it's not just a one-off and then, I don't know, I think it's working, I'm not sure it's working, So there are ways to try to work on that, and that's where hopefully getting clinical researchers engaged is going to help develop.
Jen, Dirk, Becca, thank you very much. I know this was sort of a last-minute change for us, and to have this, I think it's very powerful to have you back up here and to kind of open and close. This has been a long weekend for everybody, and a long day. These kind of do go on. It's been 2.5 days for most of you here. A lot of travel for most all of you here as well. Jet lag, I'm sure. So I want to say thank you all for showing up. This is our last session here today, and we're out of time. We want to respect that there needs to be downtime for everybody and a relaxation. So next year we are meeting in Cambridge, England, just out of Cambridge on the last weekend of June. So that is June 26, 27, and 28. At this time, we will get that up to the website. We've got a confirmed place, and we'll start making arrangements probably within the next month. So that's very exciting to have in place, and then we'll then shortly thereafter start talking about when we come back. So with that, I want to close the 4th annual PURA Syndrome Foundation annual conference, and I want to say thank you to all of you, and very happy and safe travels home.